The stagecoach rumbled to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust that swirled like golden mist in the late afternoon sun. Eleanor Adams clutched her handkerchief tightly as she peered through the grimy window at the town of Copper Creek, Montana Territory, 1878. This was at the place where her new life would begin, where her future husband awaited. A husband she'd never met beyond the exchange of 3 letters and a daguerreotype that now sat creased at the edges from her constant handling. The driver opened the door, offering his hand. "Miss Adams, we've arrived." Eleanor took a deep breath and accepted his help, stepping down carefully. At 22, she'd left behind everything familiar in Boston: her seamstress job, her tiny rented room, and the painful whispers that followed her through the narrow streets. A mail-order bride advertisement in the newspaper had promised a fresh start, and Jacob Fletcher's letters had seemed kind enough. "My trunk, please," she said quietly, smoothing down her travel-worn dress, conscious of how the fabric strained across her full figure. The small gathering at the stagecoach stop turned to stare at her. Eleanor was used to the looks, the quick assessment, the subtle disappointment, sometimes the outright disdain. She'd endured it all her life for being larger than society deemed proper for a young lady. A tall man with a sheriff's badge approached. "Miss Adams, I'm Sheriff Tanner. Mr. Fletcher asked me to escort you to his ranch. He's finishing up some business but will meet you there shortly." Eleanor nodded gratefully. At least she'd been spared the awkwardness of a first meeting in front of an audience. "That's her trunk there," the driver said, pointing to Eleanor's large wooden trunk being unloaded. A man in a dusty bowler hat snickered. "Good Lord, she's brought enough to sink a ship. Fitting, I suppose." His companion, a wiry man with a scraggly beard, chuckled. "Poor Fletcher. He asked for a bride and they've sent him 2. Eleanor's cheeks burned with shame as titters spread through the small crowd. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, wishing it would open and swallow her whole. "That's enough," came a deep voice from behind the crowd. The onlookers parted, revealing a man Eleanor hadn't noticed before. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore simple range clothes: a faded blue shirt, work-worn jeans, and boots caked with the red Montana soil. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, with striking blue eyes beneath the brim of his dusty hat. He strode forward, tipping his hat to Eleanor. "Miss Adams, I presume? I'm Jacob Fletcher." Eleanor's heart sank further. Of course, the sheriff had been mistaken. This was her intended, witnessing her humiliation firsthand. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, unable to meet his gaze. Without another word, Jacob walked past her to the stagecoach where her trunk sat. The driver was struggling with its weight. "Let me," Jacob said, and with what seemed like minimal effort, he lifted the heavy trunk and balanced it on one broad shoulder. He turned to Eleanor and, within full earshot of everyone, said clearly, "I've got your belongings, Miss Adams. You must be exhausted from your journey. You look beautiful, just as your letters suggested you would." A hush fell over the crowd. Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his in surprise. There was no mockery in his gaze, only a steady warmth that confused her. "My wagon's this way," he continued, gesturing with his free hand. "Shall we?" Eleanor followed, her legs unsteady beneath her. The crowd parted silently, the earlier mockery evaporating in the wake of Jacob's words and actions. At the wagon, he carefully placed her trunk in the back and then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His touch was warm and calloused, the hand of a working man. "Thank you," she whispered as he climbed up beside her. Jacob took the reins. "It's 10 miles to my ranch, not too far but enough distance from town and its gossips." As they left Copper Creek behind, Eleanor finally found her voice. "Mr. Fletcher, I feel I should address what just happened. I'm not what most men expect when they send for a bride." Jacob was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "Miss Adams, I didn't send for a specific shape of woman. I sent for a companion willing to share the life I've built. From your letters, you seemed intelligent, honest, and brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger." He glanced at her. "That tells me more about your character than any measurement ever could." Eleanor felt tears threatening. "You're being very kind, but I'm being honest," he interrupted gently. "Now, would you like to hear about the ranch, or would you prefer to rest? It's been a long journey for you." As they traveled, Jacob pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his 10 years in Montana. He'd come west after the war, using his savings to build a modest but successful cattle ranch. He spoke with obvious pride about his land and home. "It's not much compared to Boston," he said apologetically as they crested a hill and the ranch came into view. But to Eleanor, the two-story wooden house with its wraparound porch, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance, looked like something from a dream. Cattle dotted the green pastures and a small creek wound its way through the property. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Jacob's smile transformed his weather-worn face. "I'm glad you think so." When they arrived, a middle-aged Mexican woman emerged from the house. "Miss Adams, this is Mrs. Rosario. She helps with the cooking and cleaning 3 days a week. She's prepared the guest room for you." The woman smiled warmly. "Welcome, Miss Adams. Dinner will be ready soon." Jacob carried Eleanor's trunk upstairs to a simple but lovely room with a hand-carved bed, a dresser with a mirror, and windows that looked out over the valley. "You'll stay here until the wedding," he explained. "My room is down the hall, I thought." "Well, I thought you might appreciate some time to settle in before we make any decisions." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "Decisions?" Jacob set the trunk down and straightened. "Miss Adams, I know this is unorthodox, but I want to be clear. The minister can marry us tomorrow as planned, or we can wait. Or if after getting to know me, you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay for your return ticket to Boston." Eleanor was stunned. "But the contract is just paper," he finished. "I won't hold a woman to a marriage she doesn't want. That's no way to start a life together." With that, he excused himself to tend to his evening chores, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and an unexpected freedom she hadn't anticipated. That night at dinner, Eleanor was nervous, but Jacob and Mrs. Rosario made her feel welcome. Jacob asked about her journey, and she found herself relaxing enough to share stories about the characters she'd met on the train and stagecoach. "You have a gift for observation," Jacob commented with a smile. "My mother always said I noticed too much for my own good," Eleanor replied. "And what did she think of your coming west?" Eleanor set down her fork. "She died 3 years ago, influenza. My father passed when I was young." There was no one to object to my plans. Jacob's eyes softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know something about being alone." After dinner, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in vivid oranges and purples. Eleanor had never seen anything so beautiful. "Would you like to see more of the ranch tomorrow?" Jacob asked. "I could show you around, introduce you to the hands." "I'd like that very much," she replied. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Eleanor reflected on the day's events. Jacob Fletcher was nothing like she'd expected. His kindness at the stagecoach stop had surprised her, as had his offer to delay their wedding. Most surprising of all was how comfortable she felt in his presence, despite having just met him. The next morning, Jacob took Eleanor on a tour of the ranch. He introduced her to his 3 ranch hands, Eduardo, Charlie, and Hank, all of whom tipped their hats respectfully. "This here's Miss Adams," Jacob told them. "She's come all the way from Boston." "Welcome to Montana, Miss Adams," Hank said with a friendly grin. As they rode in the wagon around the property, Jacob explained his operations. He had a modest herd of about 300 cattle and was hoping to expand. "It's good land," he said proudly. "Rich soil, plenty of water. I've been lucky." "It seems like more than luck," Eleanor observed. "You've clearly worked hard." Jacob looked pleased at her comment. "I have, but I've reached the point where I can't do everything myself anymore. The ranch is growing and He hesitated. "I suppose I was getting lonely. That's why I placed the advertisement." Eleanor appreciated his honesty. "And have you had second thoughts now that I'm here?" The wagon came to a stop near the creek. Jacob turned to her, his blue eyes serious. "Not a single one, Miss Adams, but I worry you might have regrets, especially after yesterday's welcome." "Please call me Eleanor," she said softly. "And no, Mr. Fletcher, I don't have regrets." "Jacob," he corrected with a smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Eleanor," Jacob finally said, "I think we should postpone the wedding just for a short while. Give ourselves time to know each other better." Although she had half expected this, his words still stung. I understand, she said quietly. Jacob must have heard something in her voice because he quickly added, It's not that I don't want to marry you, I do, but I want you to be sure. Marriage out here isn't easy. It's hard work, long days, and harsh winters. I want you to know exactly what you're agreeing to. Eleanor considered his words. That's very considerate of you, Jacob, thank you. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor settled into life at the Fletcher ranch. She helped Mrs. Rosario with the cooking and cleaning, began learning how to manage the household accounts, and even tried her hand at baking bread in the wood-burning stove with mixed results that nevertheless earned praise from Jacob and the hands. Each evening, she and Jacob would sit on the porch after dinner, talking until the stars came out. He told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time fighting for the Union, and the journey west that had eventually led him to this valley. She shared stories of Boston, her work as a seamstress, and her dreams of someday having a family of her own. I never thought anyone would want me, she admitted one night. Back east, I was always the girl who took up too much space, who didn't fit the mold. Jacob's hand found hers in the darkness. Out here, we need people who can weather storms, who have strength. Boston's loss is Montana's gain, I'd say. His touch sent warmth spreading through her, and for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to hope that this arrangement might become something more than practical. One afternoon, while Jacob was out checking the fence line with Eduardo, Eleanor decided to bake an apple pie. She was elbow-deep in flour when a wagon pulled up to the house. Through the window, she saw a woman in an elegant riding habit step down, accompanied by a distinguished-looking older man. Wiping her hands on her apron, Eleanor went to the door. "Hello," she called. "May I help you?" The woman looked Eleanor up and down with undisguised disdain. "We're looking for Jacob Fletcher. Is he available?" "I'm afraid he's out checking the property. He should return by sundown. I'm Eleanor Adams. May I ask who's calling?" The older man stepped forward. "I'm Judge Whitman from Copper Creek, and this is my daughter, Victoria. We're old friends of Jacob's." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Very old friends, and you are?" "I'm Jacob's fiancé," Eleanor said, the word feeling strange on her tongue. Victoria's eyebrows shot up. "Fiancé. How interesting. Jacob never mentioned he was engaged when we saw him in town last month. Please, won't you come in?" Eleanor offered, ignoring the jab. "I can make some tea while you wait." Inside, Victoria made a show of examining the house. "I see Jacob still hasn't upgraded his furnishings." "I've always told him this place could be quite charming with the right woman's touch." The implication was clear, and Eleanor felt her confidence wavering. Victoria was everything she wasn't: slim, fashionably dressed, clearly from a good family. "Jacob seems content with his home," Eleanor replied evenly. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. "Miss Adams, forgive my daughter's forwardness, but we're rather surprised by your presence. Jacob and Victoria have an understanding, you see." Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. "An understanding," Victoria smiled triumphantly. "Jacob and I have known each other for years. We've always expected to marry once his ranch was profitable enough, which, judging by his recent cattle sales, it now is." Eleanor's mind reeled. Jacob had never mentioned Victoria or any understanding. Surely he wouldn't have sent for a mail-order bride if he was promised to someone else. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Jacob and Eduardo had returned early. When Jacob entered the house, his expression darkened at the sight of the visitors. "Judge, Victoria, what brings you out here?" Victoria rushed to him, placing a familiar hand on his arm. "Jacob, darling, we were just getting acquainted with your guest." Jacob gently removed Victoria's hand. "Eleanor is my fiancée, Victoria, not a guest," Judge Whitman frowned. "Jacob, this is most irregular. Victoria has always understood." "Victoria has understood nothing of the sort," Jacob interrupted firmly. "I've never made any promises to your daughter, Judge, despite your hints and suggestions over the years. I've told Victoria repeatedly that we aren't suited." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "Not suited, and I suppose she is." She gestured contemptuously toward Eleanor. "Really, Jacob, if you were that desperate for a wife, you could have done better than importing some oversized spinster from back east." Eleanor flinched as if struck. The room fell silent. Jacob's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "I think you should leave now, Victoria." and I'll thank you never to speak of my fiancé in that manner again. You'll regret this, Victoria hissed. Father was prepared to offer you a partnership in his mining venture. That would have made you the richest rancher in the territory. Jacob stood firm. I'm content with what I have. After the Whitmans departed, an awkward silence hung between Jacob and Eleanor. I'm sorry you had to experience that, Jacob finally said. Victoria has always had difficulty accepting rejection. Eleanor twisted her hands in her apron. Is what she said true? Was there an understanding between you? Jacob sighed heavily. Not on my part. Judge Whitman has been trying to push us together for years. He wants access to my water rights for his mining operations. Victoria, well, I think she just wants someone she can mold to her liking. He stepped closer to Eleanor. There's never been anything between us. I wouldn't have sent for you if there was. Relief washed over her, but Victoria's cruel words still echoed in her mind. She wasn't wrong about one thing. You could have done better than me. Jacob's expression softened. Eleanor, look at me. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, I don't want better, I want you. The simple declaration stole her breath. Jacob, I know it's only been 2 weeks, he said earnestly, but I've come to care for you deeply. Your kindness, your intelligence, your strength, these are the things that matter to me, not what others think. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. I've come to care for you too. Jacob took her flour-dusted hands in his. Then marry me. Not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because we choose each other. Yes, Eleanor whispered, I will. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Copper Creek. Mrs. Rosario had helped Eleanor alter one of her dresses for the occasion, letting out the seams and adding lace trim from her own wedding gown. You look beautiful, señorita, the older woman assured her as she pinned Eleanor's hair. When Jacob saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that Eleanor forgot all her insecurities. In that moment, she felt truly beautiful. The wedding was simple but heartfelt. Eduardo served as best man, and to Eleanor's surprise, several families from neighboring ranches attended, bringing gifts and well wishes. The Whitmans were noticeably absent. That night, as husband and wife, they returned to the ranch under a canopy of stars. Jacob carried Eleanor across the threshold, setting her down gently in what was now their shared bedroom. Welcome home, Mrs. Fletcher, he said softly. Their first weeks of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Jacob was patient and considerate, giving Eleanor time to grow comfortable with their new intimacy. For her part, Eleanor worked hard to learn the rhythms of ranch life, determined to be a true partner to her husband. There were challenging days. A sudden snowstorm in late October trapped them indoors for nearly a week. 2 calves were lost to wolves despite Jacob and the hand's vigilance. Eleanor struggled with the primitive cooking arrangements and once burned an entire batch of biscuits to inedible charcoal. But there were beautiful moments too. Jacob teaching Eleanor to ride, his strong hands steady at her waist. The first time she successfully managed the ranch accounts without help. The evenings spent reading aloud to each other by lamplight. And the nights when Jacob would hold her close and whisper that she was the best decision he'd ever made. As winter deepened, Eleanor began to realize that for the first time in her life, she felt at home in her body and her place in the world. Jacob's appreciation of her curves was genuine and unabashed. When she expressed surprise at this, he simply said, Out here we value substance over show. A harsh winter teaches you what truly matters. One December morning, Eleanor awoke feeling unusually queasy. At first, she attributed it to the venison stew from the night before, but when the feeling persisted for several days, she began to suspect something else entirely. Mrs. Rosario confirmed her suspicions with a knowing smile. A baby, she nodded. The signs are all there. Eleanor was overwhelmed with emotion. She had always wanted children but had feared her size might prevent it. Now, carrying Jacob's child, she felt a fierce, protective joy unlike anything she'd experienced before. That evening, she prepared a special dinner and afterward took Jacob's hand. I have something to tell you. His face grew concerned at her serious tone. Is everything all right? More than all right, she assured him. Jacob, we're going to have a baby. His expression transformed from concern to wonder. A baby, you're certain? When she nodded, he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, spinning her around as his laughter filled the room. "Eleanor Fletcher, you amazing woman," he murmured against her hair. "You've made me the happiest man in Montana territory." As winter gave way to spring, Eleanor's body changed with the seasons. Jacob was attentive to her every need, often taking on extra chores to allow her more rest. The ranch hands treated her with a mixture of protectiveness and awe, as if she were performing some mysterious miracle, which, in a way, she was. Word of the coming baby spread through the neighboring ranches, bringing visitors bearing gifts and advice. Even in town, Eleanor noticed a shift in how she was treated. The same people who had mocked her at the stagecoach stop now greeted her warmly, asking after her health and offering congratulations. "It's not you that's changed," Jacob observed one evening as they discussed this. "It's their perception. They're finally seeing what I saw from the beginning." In late August, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor with Mrs. Rosario acting as midwife, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy boy they named Thomas, after Jacob's father. Holding her son for the first time, Eleanor marveled at his perfect tiny features, the dusting of dark hair and the strong grip of his fingers around hers. "He's beautiful," Jacob whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he sat beside them on the bed. "Like his mother." As Thomas grew, so did the ranch. Jacob's careful management and Eleanor's sharp business sense resulted in expanding herds and increasing profits. They hired 2 more hands and began construction on an addition to the house. In the spring following Thomas's first birthday, they received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Tanner rode out to inform them that Judge Whitman had died of a stroke, and Victoria had sold their property and returned east. "The new owner of the Whitman land is looking to sell," the sheriff mentioned casually. "It borders your north pasture, Fletcher. Might be worth considering." Jacob glanced at Eleanor, who nodded slightly. They had been discussing expansion for months. "I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with him," Jacob decided. The purchase of the Whitman property nearly doubled the size of their ranch and gave them access to additional water sources. It was a significant investment, but one that Eleanor's careful accounting suggested they could manage. "To think," Jacob mused as they rode the boundaries of their expanded property, Thomas secure in Eleanor's lap. "If Victoria had gotten her way, none of this would exist." Eleanor smiled. "Everything happens for a reason, I suppose." By the time Thomas was 3, he had a baby sister, Catherine. The Fletcher family and ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most respected operations in the territory. Eleanor, once mocked for her size, was now sought out for her wisdom on everything from calving to preserving vegetables to negotiating cattle prices. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised Eleanor with a special gift, a new wedding band to replace the simple one he'd given her originally. "I've been saving for this," he explained as he slipped the gold band with its small diamond onto her finger. "A proper ring for my proper wife." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing Jacob had built the previous summer. The Montana night was cool and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked suddenly. "Coming west, marrying a rough rancher." Eleanor turned to study his face, still handsome despite the new lines etched by sun and wind. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "This life with you, with our children, on this land, it's more than I ever dared to dream." Jacob's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I thank God every day for bringing you to me, for giving me the sense to recognize the treasure you are." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, remembering that first day at the stagecoach stop, the mockery, the shame, and then Jacob's unexpected defense. The way he had lifted her heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing and called her beautiful when everyone else saw only her size. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I arrived?" she asked softly. Jacob smiled. "I said you looked beautiful, and I meant it." "I didn't believe you then," Eleanor admitted. "I thought you were just being kind. And now—" She met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same warmth and admiration that had sustained her through 5 years of joy and hardship, through childbirth and blizzards, through all the challenges of carving out a life together in this wild, beautiful land. Now, Eleanor said, I know that you see me truly see me. Not just my body, but my heart, my mind, my soul. You've taught me to see myself that way too. Jacob leaned forward to kiss her, his lips as gentle and reverent as they had been on their wedding day. That's because you are beautiful, Eleanor Fletcher, inside and out, and I'll spend the rest of my days reminding you of that truth. As they sat together under the vast Montana sky, Eleanor knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that saw beyond appearances to the truth of the heart, a love built on respect and partnership, a love that continued to deepen with each passing season. From an uncertain beginning at a dusty stagecoach stop to this moment of quiet contentment, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. Eleanor, once a mail-order bride mocked for her weight, was now exactly where she belonged in the arms of a cowboy who had lifted not just her trunk, but her spirits, her confidence, and her heart. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was the most beautiful story of all.